The Ordeal of the Longhouse, the Peoples of the Iroquois League in the Era of European Colonization is a historical survey penned by Daniel K. Richter, an American author. Published in 2011, this work delves into the history of the tribes collectively known as the Iroquois League, examining their struggles against American imperialism and colonization. Richter's analysis focuses on how each tribe, Tuscaroras, Senecas, Cayugas, Oneidas, and Onondagas, responded to colonial aggression, adapting their traditions and norms to ensure their survival in the face of changing circumstances. Richter's central thesis argues that by the early 1700s, the peoples of the Longhouse had undergone significant transformations compared to previous generations. Their adaptations, while preserving their land and indigenous identities, came at a considerable cultural cost. The book has garnered praise for its accessible presentation of this complex and under-researched segment of anthropological history. Throughout the book, Richter covers various topics and key moments in Iroquois history, starting from the initial centuries of American colonization. Among the most tragic events discussed is the devastating impact of foreign diseases on the Iroquois upon the arrival of Europeans. While these diseases had little effect on the Europeans themselves due to biological resistance, the Iroquois, having had no previous exposure, suffered immensely from the communicable diseases. Thousands upon thousands of Iroquois perished as a result. Richter leaves readers to ponder how indigenous history might have unfolded differently had this wave of illness not ravaged the Iroquois population. Focusing primarily on the period between 1600 and 1750, Richter argues that Iroquois culture, society, politics, and trade underwent rapid evolution as European colonizers encroached upon their lands. He contrasts the aggressive and systematic oppression faced by the Iroquois with their relatively untouched existence in the 1500s, before the arrival of early colonists. During the colonial era, the presence of other indigenous nations along the Atlantic coast served as a buffer for the Iroquois. However, as hundreds of settlements gradually overwhelmed this buffer, many coastal indigenous communities began to decline. Daniel K. Richter highlights that compared to modern times, the land during this period was relatively sparsely populated. Settlements that reached a population in the thousands were considered exceptionally large. The Iroquois towns were highly mobile, relocating every few decades once they exhausted the resources in their immediate vicinity. Richter also challenges several misconceptions about the Iroquois people. One prevalent falsehood is that the majority of the League's nations, such as the Seneca, Cayuga, Onondaga, and Oneida, were confined to what is now New York. In reality, the Iroquois nations were in constant motion within and beyond the New York region, spanning North America from the Atlantic to the Great Lakes. They engaged in regular trade with neighboring nations, including the eastern Algonquians and Abenakis, the northern Nipissings and Ojibways, the southern Shawnees and Susquehannocks, and the western Potawatomis and Wyandots. Tribal relations were not always peaceful and economic. They frequently involved bloody conflicts, even in the face of the greater threat posed by European colonialism. To provide a broader context for the challenges faced by the Iroquois, Richter delves into the geopolitical dynamics of the Great Game in Asia. This protracted contest between the Russians and British centered around the control of Central Asia. While acknowledging the tensions of the Great Game, Richter argues that it pales in comparison to the far more intricate and multifaceted struggles waged by the Iroquois and their adversaries during the 1600s and 1700s. In fact, the Iroquois adapted and mirrored the governmental structures and patterns of the colonists in their diplomatic endeavors. The Iroquois maintained frequent communication with New England, New Amsterdam, later New York, and New France, demonstrating their awareness of political developments in Europe. As the power of the Iroquois waned and New France and New England appeared poised to strike, they formed new trade alliances with settlers from Pennsylvania to sustain themselves. Within the Iroquois Confederacy, there were divisions regarding their relationships with the French and British. Some favored alliances with the French, while others leaned towards the British, and some preferred to remain independent from either European power. In the concluding chapters of his book, Richter asserts that Iroquois history not only endured but thrived beyond the 18th century. Even with the emergence of the United States and Canada as nation-states, the Iroquois nations continued to adapt and evolve. These historical examples of resilience and survival indicate that the peoples of the Longhouse have the capacity to navigate and thrive in our modern world. I hope you enjoyed this video. Leave a like if you did and be sure to subscribe. Thank you.